trapped in Kentucky. On January 30th, 1925, cave explorer Floyd Collins descended into Sand Cave near Cave City, Kentucky. He did not come back up. Sand Cave sits in a region of Kentucky that had been drawing curious explorers for decades. The land above it is quiet farmland, rolling and unremarkable from the surface, but beneath it runs a labyrinth of passages that locals had been crawling through for generations. Floyd Collins knew this land and these caves better than almost anyone. He had grown up in the area, had spent years exploring the underground passages of the region, and had developed a reputation as one of the most capable and daring cave explorers in the state. He was not a reckless man. He was experienced, physically capable, and familiar with the particular challenges of cave exploration in that part of Kentucky. Collins was 37 years old in January of 1925. He had already discovered several notable caves in the region and had developed something of a commercial interest in finding new attractions that might draw tourists to the area. Sand Cave was a site he had visited before. It was not unknown territory. On the morning of January 30th, he entered the cave alone, as he had done many times, navigating through its passages with the confidence of someone who had spent years underground. The passage Collins was working through that morning was narrow. Navigating it required crawling, pressing the body flat against the stone, and pulling forward with limited leverage. This was not unusual for the caves of that region. Collins had moved through passages like it before. The difference on January 30th was a single rock. Somewhere deep in the passage, a rock shifted. It fell and caught Collins by the ankle. The exact dimensions of that rock and the precise mechanics of how it pinned him are not fully documented, but the result was absolute. He could not pull free. He could not move forward. He could not move back. He was lying face down in a narrow passage, trapped at the ankle, in the cold and dark of Sand Cave. Collins called for help. Eventually, someone heard him. Word spread quickly through the surrounding community. By the following noon, more than 150 people had gathered at the entrance to Sand Cave, drawn by news that a man was trapped underground. It was one of the largest spontaneous rescue mobilizations the region had seen. Neighbors, farmers, experienced cavers, and curious onlookers all arrived within hours of the initial alarm. The scale of the response was immediate and genuine. The fundamental problem was the passage itself. The route to Collins was narrow enough that only one person could be inside it at a time, crawling through cold, muddy water to reach him. Rescuers could not work in teams at his location. They could not bring equipment through in any useful quantity. What they could do was crawl to him, one at a time, and try. Reporter William Burke Miller of the Louisville Courier-Journal was among those who made that crawl repeatedly. Miller fed Collins milk and whiskey during these visits and conducted interviews while Collins lay pinned in the passage. Miller later wrote of the experience, "The cold, dirty water numbs us as soon as we start in. We have come to tell ourselves that our suffering is as nothing compared to Collins." Collins remained calm through the early days of the rescue. He spoke with the people who crawled in to reach him. He ate and drank what they brought. He was not panicking. More than 115 hours after he first became trapped, Collins told Miller that death held no terror for him, but that he did not expect to die in the immediate future. He believed at that point that he would be freed. The rescue effort continued for 18 days. Engineers, miners, and volunteers attempted multiple approaches. A shaft was dug from the surface. The passage itself was worked from the entrance. Hundreds of people contributed to the effort in shifts, in freezing conditions, in a cave that offered almost no room to maneuver. The operation drew national media attention and became one of the most widely followed news stories in the country at that point in time. People across the United States followed the updates from Sand Cave as the days passed. When rescuers finally reached Collins after 18 days, he was dead. He had died from exposure. The cold, the wet, the lack of adequate warmth over more than 2 weeks had killed him. The rock had held him in place. The cave had done the rest. Floyd Collins was pronounced dead underground. His death generated significant national attention regarding the protection and management of Kentucky's cave systems. It directly contributed to the federal effort to preserve the surrounding cave network, and his case is cited as a foundational event in the history of Mammoth Cave National Park and its formal establishment as a protected site, sealed in Peak Cavern. On March 22, 1959, a 20-year-old university student named Neil Moss descended into an unexplored shaft inside Peak Cavern in Derbyshire, England. He was 1,000 feet from the entrance. He never came back out. Peak Cavern is one of the most significant cave systems in England. Located near the village of Castleton in Derbyshire, it has been known and explored for centuries. Its entrance is among the largest natural cave openings in Britain, a wide mouth of rock that gives way to an extensive system of passages and chambers extending deep into the limestone hillside. By 1959, much of the cave had been mapped and explored, but sections of it remained unmapped. offering the kind of unexplored territory that drew serious cavers of that era. Neil Moss was a philosophy student at Oxford University. He was 20 years old, intellectually driven, and had developed an interest in caving as a physical pursuit that matched his appetite for discovery. On March 22, 1959, he joined a group exploring Peak Cavern. The group moved through the cave's known passages and reached an area where an unexplored vertical shaft presented itself. Moss decided to descend it. The shaft was approximately 2.5 feet by 1.5 feet at its narrowest point. It was not a straightforward vertical drop, but a corkscrew formation in the rock, twisting as it descended. A person descending it would have to rotate their body to follow the geometry of the stone. Moss went in. He descended to a point where the shaft narrowed further and then locked around his shoulders. The corkscrew geometry that had allowed him to descend now made reversing the movement nearly impossible. His body was held by the rock at the shoulders. He could not go further down. He could not come back up. He was jammed in a passage that was not wide enough to allow any of the movements that might have freed him. His companions understood the severity of the situation immediately. They could not reach him effectively from above. The shaft's dimensions did not allow a second person to descend alongside him or past him. The alarm was raised, and the passage from the cave to the surface became the critical question. Who could help, and how fast could they get there? The rescue operation that assembled in response to Moss's entrapment was substantial. More than 200 specialists were mobilized, including teams from the Royal Air Force, Royal Navy divers, and miners from the National Coal Board who had professional training in confined space operations. These were not volunteers with limited experience. These were people whose professional skills were specifically relevant to the problem of extracting a human being from an extremely confined underground space. They gathered, they assessed, and they worked. For 2 days, the rescue teams attempted to reach Moss or create conditions that would allow him to be freed. The shaft's geometry frustrated every approach. The width that had allowed Moss to descend to his current position did not allow the leverage or equipment access that extraction required. The specialists worked in rotating shifts, dealing with the physical difficulty of operating in a passage that could only accommodate one person moving at a time, in conditions that were cold, wet, and physically punishing. The atmosphere at the cave entrance was one of sustained tension. Moss's father, Eric, had traveled to Peak Cavern and remained at the entrance for 48 hours. He waited while the rescue operation continued below him, 200 specialists working to reach his son 1,000 feet inside the hill. The carbon dioxide was the thing that could not be stopped. In an enclosed shaft with a limited air circulation, the carbon dioxide produced by Moss's own breathing accumulated. There was nowhere for it to go. The sealed geometry of the passage that held him also sealed in the air he exhaled. As the hours passed, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the shaft increased. Rescuers working near the shaft could detect it. There was no ventilation solution that could be implemented in time. Neil Moss died on March 24, 1959. Carbon dioxide accumulation was the confirmed cause of death. The circumstances of the death declaration became one of the most unusual aspects of this case. Dr. Hugh Kidd, who was involved in the medical response, described what followed as the first and only time in his career that he had declared a patient dead without physically seeing the body. The shaft held Moss, and the shaft could not be opened. Death was declared based on confirmed conditions and the passage of time, not on direct examination. Eric Moss, still at the entrance, urged the rescue teams not to risk further lives attempting to recover his son's body. The teams honored that request. The shaft was sealed with loose rocks. That section of Peak Cavern has been permanently designated Moss Chamber since that day, flooded 100 feet in. In the early hours of August 18, 2005, 4 people entered a flooded tunnel inside Golem's Cave on Y Mountain in Provo, Utah. None of them came out. Y Mountain sits above Provo, a prominent landmark in the landscape east of the city. The cave beneath it had acquired its informal name from the narrow, winding nature of its passages, the kind of underground environment that attracts people drawn to extreme confined spaces. Golem's Cave was not a managed attraction. It had no lighting, no safety equipment, no oversight. It was accessible to anyone willing to make the hike up the mountain and push into its entrance. The 4 who entered that night were Scott McDonald, 28 years old, Blake Donner, 24, Jennifer Galbraith, 21, and Ariel Singer, 18. They arrived at the cave at approximately 2 in the morning. The timing was deliberate. This was not a casual daytime visit. They had come specifically to swim the flooded passage that formed the central challenge of the cave, a tunnel approximately 18 by 20 inches in cross-section, filled with black water. A 5th member of the group, a friend named Joseph, remained at the tunnel entrance. He did not enter the flooded passage. He waited at the threshold as the 4 others moved into the water and pushed into the tunnel ahead of them. The passage was not long in absolute terms. The group was approximately 100 feet from the cave entrance when they entered the flooded section. 100 feet is not a significant distance in most contexts. In an 18 by 20 inch water-filled tunnel in complete darkness, it is another kind of measurement entirely. There is no room to turn around. There is no room for two people to pass each other. The only direction available is forward. Joseph waited. 1 hour passed. No one surfaced. He raised the alarm. Rescue teams were called to Y Mountain and arrived at the cave. The approach to the flooded passage was exactly what it had been when the four entered. A narrow opening filled with water, requiring anyone who entered to commit fully to the passage with no ability to assist or communicate with anyone inside. Rescue personnel worked to pump water from the cave tunnel. The equipment was brought up the mountain and positioned. The pumping operation was the only mechanical intervention that could realistically alter conditions inside the passage. The water level was the barrier, and reducing it was the one tool available. Despite the pumping effort, and despite the four victims being only approximately 100 feet from the entrance, the passage remained insurmountable. The exact circumstances of what occurred inside the tunnel were not disclosed in detail. What was confirmed was the outcome. All four were found dead. The specific individual sequence of events inside the flooded passage was not established in official reporting. Scott McDonald, Blake Donner, Jennifer Galbraith, and Ariel Singer were pronounced dead. The cave was sealed within 24 hours of the incident. It has never been reopened. Inverted in Nutty, Putty. On November 24, 2009, a 26-year-old man named John Jones entered Nutty Putty Cave in Utah with a group that included family members. He became stuck upside down in a fissure 18 inches wide and 10 inches high, approximately 150 feet below the surface. He died there approximately 28 hours later. Nutty Putty Cave had been a recreational destination for years before November of 2009. Located in Utah County, it was a hydrothermal cave with passages of varying difficulty, including tight squeezes that attracted people looking for the physical challenge of confined space navigation. It was not an unknown or unmarked site. Groups visited regularly. The cave had a history as a social destination, particularly for families and young adults in the area who wanted the experience of moving through tight underground passages. John Jones was 26 years old on Thanksgiving weekend of 2009. He was a medical student and a father. He entered Nutty Putty that day as part of a group, moving through the cave's passages the way many visitors had before him. At some point, Jones entered a narrow passage that he believed connected to a known route through the cave. It did not. The passage narrowed as he moved through it, and Jones continued downward into a fissure that closed around him. The fissure was 18 inches wide and 10 inches high. Jones was oriented head downward at an angle, with his arms pinned beneath his chest. His head was below his feet. The geometry of his position and the confirmed angle of his entrapment meant that blood was pooling toward his skull. He was not simply stuck. He was stuck in one of the worst orientations a trapped person can occupy, with gravity working against every physiological system that needed to function to keep him alive. Rescuers reached him. This is the detail that defined everything that followed. The passage that held Jones did not prevent rescuers from getting to him. They were physically present at his location, close enough to check his vital signs. The spokesman for the sheriff's department confirmed this directly. They were right there with him, checking his vital signs. Proximity was not the problem. The problem was that the geometry of the fissure made extraction mechanically impossible using standard approaches. The rescue team worked through the day and into the night. Various attempts were made to move Jones from his position. The fissure that held him was not a passage that widened further along, or offered any alternative geometry. It was what it was, 18 by 10 inches, closing around a human body that had slid into it head first. A system of ropes and pulleys was constructed. The engineering of moving a trapped person upward through a 10-inch high fissure while they are inverted and unable to assist required a mechanical solution that rescuers worked to build inside the cave itself. Equipment was brought in. The system was assembled. After nearly 24 hours of continuous effort, the pulley system achieved what nothing else had. Jones was freed. He was moved from the position that had held him for almost a full day. He spoke with his wife over police radio. That was the closest John Jones came to leaving Nutty Putty Cave alive. The system of ropes and pulleys failed. The mechanism that had freed him gave way, and gravity did what gravity does. Jones was pulled back down into the exact fissure, into the exact position, head downward, arms pinned, blood pooling in his skull, that he had occupied for the previous 24 hours. He died shortly after, at approximately 28 hours after he first became trapped. His body was never recovered. The geometry that had held him in life held him in death. Retrieving him was not possible without risks to rescuers that officials determined could not be justified. Nutty Putty Cave was permanently sealed following his death. It remains sealed. John Jones remains inside it. Depth beyond return. On January 8, 2005, at 6:13 in the morning, world record diver Dave Shaw shook the hand of his dive partner Don Shirley, said, "I'll see you in 20 minutes," and ducked beneath the surface of Bushman's Hole in South Africa. He did not come back in 20 minutes. Bushman's Hole is a flooded cave sinkhole located in the northern Cape of South Africa. It is among the deepest known freshwater cave dives in the world, a vertical shaft filled with water that descends into darkness well beyond the limits of conventional diving. 270 meters is not a depth that most divers will ever approach. It requires specialized gas mixtures, specialized equipment, extensive preparation, and a level of experience that only a small number of people in the world possess. Dave Shaw was among that number. Shaw had established himself as one of the most accomplished technical divers in the world. He had dived Bushman's Hole before, had gone deeper in it than almost anyone, and had set records in the process. He was not approaching this dive as an unknown challenge. He had been to the bottom of that particular darkness before. What he had not done before was attempt to retrieve a body from it. Dion Dreyer had drowned in Bushman's Hole approximately a decade before January of 2005. His body had settled at 270 meters, held at that depth by the physics of the water and the depth pressure. Dreyer's family had lived for years without being able to recover him. Shaw had encountered Dreyer's remains during a previous dive and had committed to bringing him back up. This was the purpose of the dive on January 8th. This was what Shaw meant when he told Shirley he would be back in 20 minutes. Don Shirley waited at an intermediate depth. This is how deep technical dives are structured. A dive partner does not accompany the primary diver to the maximum depth. They stage at a position along the ascent route, available to assist during the return. Shirley's position meant he was present in the water column, waiting, when the 20-minute window passed and Shaw did not appear. Shaw had reached the bottom. He had reached Dreyer's body. The body bag that Shaw had brought down to contain the remains became the problem. At 270 meters, working in the physiological state produced by that depth, Shaw became entangled in the body bag. Narcosis, the confirmed cause of the dive's failure, affects cognitive and physical function at extreme depth in ways that are documented across deep diving literature. Shaw could not free himself. His dive camera was recording. Shirley waited. The window extended far past 20 minutes. Shirley himself, now at risk from the duration of his own time in the water, began to experience the physical consequences of an extended deep dive. He could not descend to Shaw's depth to help. The depth itself was the barrier. Shirley survived his ascent, but the experience left him with permanent ear damage and impaired balance. 4 days passed after January 8th. On the 4th day, the remains of both Dave Shaw and Dion Dreyer floated to the surface of Bushman's Hole. Decomposition gases had done what Shaw's plan had set out to do. The two men rose together. Dave Shaw was confirmed dead. Narcosis and entanglement at 270 meters were the confirmed factors. The dive camera that recorded his final minutes exists. The footage has never been publicly released. Yorkshire's longest night. In 2019, a 74-year-old man named Harry Hesketh was exploring Curtain Pot on Fountains Fell in the Yorkshire Dales in England when he fell approximately 20 feet down a pitch inside the cave. 90 rescuers worked for 17 hours to bring him out. He died just before they succeeded. Curtain Pot is located on Fountains Fell in the Yorkshire Dales, a region of northern England known for its extensive limestone cave systems. The Yorkshire Dales contain some of the most challenging and technically demanding caving terrain in Britain, with passages that range from walkable chambers to pitches and squeezes that test even experienced cavers. Curtain Pot was described by rescue personnel as unmapped and extremely narrow. This was not a cave with established survey data or known hazard markers. Hesketh and his companions were moving through terrain that had not been formally documented. Harry Hesketh was 74 years old. He was an experienced caver, not a casual visitor to underground environments. The Yorkshire Dales caving community includes people who have spent decades in these systems, and Hesketh was part of that tradition. He was not exploring Curtain Pot without knowledge of what cave environments demand. The fall happened during the exploration. Hesketh fell approximately 20 feet down a pitch, a vertical drop inside the cave that deposited him at a lower level in the system. He broke his left femur. A broken femur in a surface environment is a serious injury requiring emergency treatment. A broken femur in an unmapped, extremely narrow cave system, 20 feet below the point of entry, is a different category of problem entirely. The bone was broken. He could not move under his own power. The passage around him could not accommodate the equipment or the personnel that a standard extraction would require. His companions understood what the situation required. They exited the cave to raise the alarm. One companion returned to stay with Hesketh to keep him company and monitor his condition while the rescue response assembled above. The Cave Rescue Organization was called. Their personnel began mobilizing. A medical officer was deployed into the cave to reach Hesketh and assess his condition. The medical officer reached him, treated him as far as the conditions allowed, and confirmed the initial responsive state. Hesketh was alive and conscious in the early period after the fall. Then he went into cardiac arrest. The cardiac arrest was reversed. Hesketh was revived, but the medical officer could assess what the revival meant in context. Hesketh was deteriorating. The decision was made to attempt extraction, not because conditions were favorable for it, but because leaving him in place was the worst option. The cave's narrowness made every step of that extraction a technical problem that had to be solved in real time, in confined space, with a patient who could not assist his own movement. 90 volunteers assembled for the operation. This number represents virtually the entire active capacity of the Cave Rescue Organization and associated teams. The equipment deployed accounted for nearly every piece of extraction gear in their stores. 1,600 volunteer hours were consumed by the 17-hour operation. These are not numbers that describe a routine rescue. These are the numbers of a maximum effort. The medic later described the moment Hesketh reached them. As he came towards me, he was lifeless. He had died during the extraction process, just before it was complete. A volunteer involved in the operation stated afterward that the only way Hesketh could have survived was if he had been able to help himself out of the cave. The passage was too narrow for any other outcome to have been possible. This was not a failure of effort or expertise. It was a statement about what a cave can and cannot allow. Hesketh's daughter wrote publicly in the days following his death. She addressed her letter to every one of the 90 rescuers who had spent 17 hours in the dark trying to bring her father home, thanking them for what she described as their tremendous efforts. Seal who didn't surface. In June of 2018, 12 boys aged 11 to 16 and their football coach became trapped inside Tam Luang Nong Non Cave in northern Thailand when monsoon flooding sealed the entrance behind them. The effort to bring them out became one of the largest cave rescue operations in recorded history. It cost 2 lives from the team that went in to help. Tam Luang Nang Non is a cave system extending several kilometers into the hills of Chiang Rai province in northern Thailand. It is not a small cave. Its passages run deep into the hillside, with chambers, flooded sections, and routes that require navigating through water at multiple points. The cave system had been known and occasionally visited, but it was not a formally managed site, and its deeper sections presented serious challenges even to experienced cavers under dry conditions. The 12 boys and their coach entered the cave in late June of 2018. The monsoon season in northern Thailand brings rainfall that can raise water levels inside cave systems rapidly and without predictable warning. By the time the group attempted to exit, the entrance passage had flooded. They moved deeper into the cave to escape the rising water, reaching a section of elevated passage where they could remain above the waterline. They were alive. They were also completely cut off from the surface. The search, when it was mounted, involved personnel from multiple countries. Thai military and civilian rescue teams were joined by international specialists, divers, and volunteers who traveled to Chiang Rai province specifically to contribute to the operation. The cave's flooded passages meant that reaching the boys required diving through sections of zero visibility in passages that offered no margin for error. Oxygen supplies needed to be staged along the route to support both the divers making the trip and the eventual extraction of the boys themselves. Saman Kunan was a former Thai Navy SEAL who had volunteered for the rescue operation. He was not on active duty. He came because the operation needed people with his skills, and he had them. In the overnight hours of early July, Kunan was returning from a mission inside the cave. He had been placing oxygen canisters along a possible exit route, staging the air supplies that the extraction would depend on. He was on his way back when he lost consciousness. His dive partner was with him. The partner attempted to revive Kunan inside the flooded passage of Tam Luang. The revival effort was not successful. Saman Kunan died somewhere along the route he had been working to secure for others. The oxygen had run out. The man placing the canisters that would keep others breathing had none left for himself. The operation continued after Kunan's death. His loss was acknowledged, and the teams kept working. The boys were ultimately extracted, all 12 of them, along with their coach. Every one of the people who had been trapped inside Tam Luang came out alive. The mission succeeded. Saman Kunan did not come out with them. A second death followed the operation. Beirut Pakbara, a rescue diver who had participated in the Tam Luang operation, died in December of 2019 from a blood infection that was contracted during the rescue. His death came more than a year after the boys walked back into daylight, a delayed cost of the same operation. Saman Kunan was confirmed dead inside Tam Luang Nong Non Cave. Cause of death was oxygen depletion. Beirut Pakbara died on December 7, 2019 from infection contracted during the same operation. 13 people survived because of the team that went in. 2 members of that team did not come back. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.